Hello, everybody. You're listening to the Big Chill Podcast. This is episode 342, Hurdling Obstacles with Josh Apiafi. Hello, Big Chillians, and welcome back to the Big Chill Podcast. I'm Frank, joined as always with Sam and Eddie. Later, we have a really nice interview with Josh Apiafi, who is the Sky Sports Racing presenter and founder of Racing for Rewards. So look forward to that a little later in the podcast. But first, I guess big news coming out of United with the sacking. So who wants to start and say whether it was deserved or undeserved?
I don't think there's anyone out there. I don't think Solskaer would think it's undeserved. I mean, Sam and I were together on Saturday and we saw the clip of him. He gave a wave of, this is the last time I'm doing this. Like this is the final nail in the coffin. This seals the deal. And yeah, I think he takes credit for helping to right the ship slightly. And then it stagnated again. And I actually think there's been there was like Talk Sport and a number of the other sports radio shows and stations were critical of the fact that he gave a farewell interview to MUTV the day after and saying how that's just kind of a joke and no other club would do this. Chelsea didn't let Frank Lampard do it. And I think that the difference is in this instance, there's no animosity. I think he feels like he was given a good opportunity to try and do his best, and that he probably reached a point where someone else will do a better job. And I think there's sort of an honest assessment there, probably from both parties, that this is for the best at this particular moment in time.
Yeah. It's I mean, when you look back on it, it's a bit of a strange one how it's kind of endured, right? There's so many of these like last gasp moments that Solskjaer survived, all the PSG games, all the kind of win or two over Manchester City as well. Like when it's mattered, when you feel like it's win or out, or losing out, sorry, he's gone. But then he goes and pulls out a good enough performance or a deserved enough performance that he then continues on with the job, puts on a kind of little bit of form, and then it deteriorates again. But when you even just go further back, like wasn't Solskjaer like Cardiff's worst manager on record as well? And you think to yourself sometimes, like the escalation that this manager, who is still very kind of young in his career, he was put into there as like an interim role because, you know, fan loved, club loved. You know, it's a hell of an escalation for someone, and to survive the way they have, I think is actually, in hindsight, pretty amicable.
Yeah, he's totally unqualified for the position. You know, managing Cardiff and Molde shouldn't entitle you to manage one of the biggest clubs in world football. And had he not played for the club, there's no way he would have done. And I mean, yeah, there's these little moments over the course of his tenure where if single games had gone differently, he would have been sacked a lot sooner. And then if you even think back, I mean, if I have the timeline right, I mean, he was interim manager basically up until the moment that they knocked PSG out, right? And then that was kind of the thing that got him the full-time job. So if you think there, a somewhat controversial penalty in the end of a Champions League tie has been the thing that has kept him on as Manchester United manager. He seems like a very nice person.
I was gonna say, speaking of that, did you see there's that little video that went viral of him leaving and going, I think, stepping into the car, and there's like a fan there, and he just like hugs the fan kind of passionately, and then just hops into the car. That was kind of a unique moment. The thing actually I was gonna ask both of you is, I know Eddie is a huge Malcolm Gladwell fan, and Malcolm Gladwell has his kind of theory about how CEOs turn over so rapidly, and it's really hard to assess whether the success or failure of the company is based off of that CEO or what the last CEO had put into place. And then, you know, they were subsequently sacked and then the new one took over, and did they actually do anything, or, you know, that kind of thing, and how it takes more time than people think to see results from leadership. So he was there for what, about 2.5, 3 years, 2 full seasons, and, you know, a little bit in that first season, and then half this season. Do you think that's enough of a sample size to say that he was ineffective, or is it a little cut short where maybe you should have given a little more time with all these changes that they're making, bring in a lot of new people in this last year to kind of see what he could have done and kind of solidified all these new signings?
I think for me, if you had you would almost consider it like if a manager had like a par for the course of like, I don't know, a couple of years or something like that, 2 or 3 years. And then there's variables in it that shorten your time or make it more risky. Like the amount of money that Solskjaer spent in the summer just gone was definitely going to make it easier to fire him quicker if it wasn't going the right way. So for me, I think a Premiership manager doing 2.5 years is actually, I don't know if it is, but it sounds pretty good in kind of recent history. When you look at like the kind of fickle nature of the way that Watford
it would be above average over the past decade for sure.
Watford, Newcastle, even to an extent, is, a lot of these teams turn over managers, and also a lot of these teams that eventually get relegated bring in someone like Sam Allardyce, Alan Pardew, someone that's going to only be there for 3 months anyway.
But like those types of managers, though, like those types of teams, like in Newcastle, Watford, I mean, they're not having the player turnover that someone at United is having. Like, I feel like it's a little tougher to be judged when a quarter of your starting 11 is turned over in 1 year than saying, now make the most of this. And then halfway through getting thrown Ronaldo as a wrench and trying to incorporate that in, it's a little different.
That's a hell of a wrench when you've got like Ronaldo.
Sam, I bet Ronaldo's got a hell of a wrench.
Look, I think the turnover in most Premier League squads is pretty comparable. I think the difference with United is that their turnover tends to be turnover that they planned on, whereas for other clubs, it's your best player has outgrown that particular step in their career and leaves. That I think is far more challenging than where Manchester United are much more in control of their own destiny when it comes to who plays for them and when players leave. But I think he had a sufficient amount of time to prove himself. And I think it got to the point where it was difficult to imagine him taking them to making them genuine title contenders. And that's just contenders. I can't imagine. And part of the criticism that has been leveled at him is that he's too nice. That you can't be a manager who's just buddy-buddy with everyone, and that he didn't have a kind of ruthless streak that you need, where players are a bit intimidated by you, where you have the ability after a bad performance to really rip into them, and that he was just too nice of a person. I don't know if that's true. I don't know if as a manager or as a coach you have to be. There are plenty of examples of people who are very successful in the world of sports as coaches or managers who are fundamentally just nice people. They have to be in the right situation to then succeed, but definitely that sort of player's coach can work. The question is, was it a good time to get rid of him in the sense that I don't know if necessarily the options available to United right now are the right ones? That would have been the only temptation to keep him for a little bit longer, because you have to assume with a club as big as United that when they're making that decision, they already have a sense of who they want to appoint, and they need to already have a sense that that person is interested in the position. Now, whether that's Pochettino or Zidane or a host of other names that have been thrown out there from all over the planet, the sporting manager, you have the former manager of Germany, you have a number of names being thrown around. I don't know. The rumors here in France is that Zinedine Zidane has no interest in the job. That's what French media is saying.
Yes. So apparently... Yeah, and apparently Zidane or the family have come out and said that England isn't in his kind of career trajectory at this point. But Pochettino obviously came out and said that he wouldn't be against like a mid-season move to the Premier League. I guess from what I've heard tonight, it sounds like Pochettino's going, and it sounds like Zidane's imminent because of the return to France kind of thing. But for me, having a Man U manager be sacked usually means they're of high caliber to almost know where they might go next. Like there's usually an obvious opening or international management or something like that. The thing with Solskjaer is I don't know where he goes. Like I can't see.
Are you sure on that statement, Sam? The statement you've just made.
I've made several. Which one?
The one that when you think of a Manchester United manager being sacked. that you think that another door is open for him. Because let's really think back on it. So the majority of our lifetime is dominated by one Manchester United manager who retired. So we knew where he was going when he stepped aside. And aside from that, everyone that they've had as a manager since then, I would say, as almost exclusively, this has been the biggest moment of their careers, and afterwards it's not certain where they were going to fall. Mourinho is probably the only exception to that. Everyone else was either at the back end of their career, if you think of some of the higher profile managers who've had positions, or managers where it was a step up, like David Moyes immediately after Ferguson, and then it was unclear as to what Moyes was going to have to do afterwards to sort of salvage the reputation that he'd had prior to being at Old Trafford. I don't know. I think
if we walk it through, then David Moyes went to Sociedad, like he went to Spain, if I'm right, for the next kind of trip. Which again, I'm not arguing is obvious. I'm just saying that that's where he went. Louis van Gaal went to, what is he, the Dutch manager? But he wasn't first time out, was he? He didn't leave Man U and then take on the Netherlands job.
Mourinho, no, he's now actually the manager at a pub called the Dutch in London.
Oh, I get it. So he's still in the UK. He's still in England. Yeah, there we go. Argument done, Eddie. He's still in the English game.
He had 5 years out of the game, Louis van Gaal. So pretty much, I think the Netherlands was the only job that he was really going to come back for or be offered that was significant enough to tempt him out of a maybe unplanned retirement, but what probably looked like a retirement. And so then the only thing that saves him is the crisis in the Dutch national team.
Yeah, I feel like this is another good example of Sam's optimism and kind of cheerful personality, where he's not as concerned about who's the next manager coming in. He's more concerned, like, a manager just got sacked. Oh, I hope he's going to end up all right. Like, where's he going to go next? I hope he lands on his feet.
You know what?
Well, I think no one else in United really gives a shit right now about that.
It's kind of it's a fair point though. Like, actually, when you go through the Man United managers since Ferguson, it's kind of fair what Eddie said, and I kind of like have come around to that. I guess for me, it's just the fact of a Manchester United manager leaving Manchester United implies a level of experience or caliber to assume they can go somewhere of similar reputation.
This is my point. It doesn't. It's just that for the vast majority of our lifetimes, Manchester United were run by one of the greatest managers of all time. It would be the same thing with Arsenal, who when I imagine an Arsenal manager, I think of Arsene Wenger. I don't think of the host of fairly unsuccessful managers who have flown through that door since he left. And it's the same with Old Trafford. I still think of Ferguson when I think of who, United managers, even though we're now going back a decade since he's been gone. But yeah, we're people in our 30s. So it's like asking me to think of Chicago Bulls players and I think of Michael Jordan. And be like, oh, the Chicago Bulls always have a really good shooting guard. And then, do they? How good was Ben Gordon?
I just wish you had a soundbite for when you said since he's been gone. Nice little Kelly Clarkson one.
We did have
that would be a good one.
We did have several soundbite suggestions come in. So again, for any new listeners, or we do a little morning zoo from time to time. So if you do have soundbite suggestions,
no, we don't do a morning zoo recording. We have soundbites that mimic what you'd hear on the morning zoo. It's not like we do a podcast and every Tuesday, Thursday, we also do like a morning radio show.
Maybe we should have called ourselves the nighttime zoo. That would have been maybe a rebrand. Is in order, but no, go ahead and follow us on Twitter, on the Big Chill Podcast, on Instagram, the Big Chill Podcast. It's the best way to interact with us. If you have requests of topics that you'd like us to cover, or guests you'd like us to interview, or sound bites you'd like us to add to our morning zoo segments. And then I suppose while we're speaking of managers, I guess someone who definitely won't be becoming Manchester United manager is Gareth Southgate, who had his contract extended through 2024 this week. I'm not sure if I love that as a decision. I know
Hey,
that
wait. No. Stop. You cannot say you're not sure if you love it when 6 months ago you proclaimed that you are a better manager than Southgate and he is useless and is ruining the squad.
No, okay. That might be. That's not exactly what I said. I didn't say, for
What a
example, that
stutter!
I didn't say, for example, that I am a better manager. I said that I would be a better manager. Just to be clear, clearly my
You
resume does
could
not
be.
stick. Would be, but look, I've always said what Gareth Southgate deserves a ton of credit for is the way he has helped the England football team's image and the way that that team has matured under his leadership and the example that he sets and the way he has sort of galvanized a particular culture within the England football team. And in many ways, that is far more important than anything that takes place on the pitch. So I have no major objections to Gareth Southgate being England manager, and I like having him as England manager because of that fact. But I think he's been outmanaged at different times, particularly I think in the final of the Euros, where I think England lost because their manager was not as good as a manager on the other side of the halfway line, and I don't know if with the quality of players that are available to him, particularly in the attacking sense, I don't know if it is within his nature to put a team together that will take advantage and maximize the potential of the players available. That's my criticism of him. And I would have liked to have seen before. I can see both sides of the coin. One is that it's nice to give him the vote of confidence and for all the players to know that their futures with Gareth Southgate and if he's very popular with them. But he's England manager, not Manchester United manager, so he's not trying to sign anyone. He doesn't need to try and stop players from leaving. It's not as if Harry Kane is suddenly going to start representing Scotland because he's not sure as to whether or not Gareth Southgate is staying in charge of England. So I would have said see out the next World Cup and then just the performances are decent to good, then extend his contract. But there is a possibility here that it starts to feel as if he's wasted an opportunity. And do we really want him around for another 3 years?
Yeah, if we have a poor World Cup, and people's definitions are going to change on what constitutes poor, but then you've basically got a little bit of a lame duck manager for 2 years, right, leading up to an opportunity for us to probably be kind of favourites for another Euros. But the timing's right, isn't it? Or the timing's interesting, right? Is it because England were at any point approached, like, by a club to kind of have him as a manager after
I
a
can say
year?
categorically no. Who on earth is wanting to bring Gareth Southgate back into club management? That would in any way tempt him. That's the other thing you have to factor in.
Who did he manage in? Middlesbrough?
Yeah.
Was it just Middlesbrough?
I think it's just Middlesbrough and then the England youth setup. He was the under-21s manager, right?
Oh.
I think he was only manager of Middlesbrough. And to go back to a point that you raised several minutes ago now, Frank, that point by Malcolm Gladwell, I think, is a decent one. I think that it's the kind of logic that can often apply to presidents, where it's the case, a new president comes into office and suddenly gets credited with the economy picking up. But then when you factor in the latency of so many of the aspects going into the economy, it's things that were done 3 or 4 years prior that are actually starting to have an effect. But at the same time, it's a Malcolm Gladwell theory. So it's probably not a Malcolm Gladwell theory. It's probably just some fairly sound academic research that he's then bastardized and twisted it into his own mindless ramblings.
Eddie, could you do a better job than Malcolm Gladwell?
No. He is very, very good at what he does.
Yeah, he is.
He is.
I mean, come on. No, the underhand free throw to kind of bring it in, I guess, to our sports theme is a pretty good, I don't know, debate that he's brought up.
I mean, when you're talking about, the number of the topics that look, he's very good at identifying interesting quirks in reasoning or sort of
Statistics.
aspects of academic research that people aren't really paying attention to. I mean, that's like the 10,000 hours theory, right? He's taken research that's really been done. It's just the people who did that research are very annoyed by the fact that they didn't prove that doing something for 10,000 hours meant that you'd be good at it. They just prove that if you are naturally quite good at something, that the moment at which you become very good is usually around 10,000 hours. But it's not as if I sit down tomorrow to play piano and don't stop for 10,000 hours, that I'm going to be then playing Carnegie Hall in my 10,001st hour. I think that's the issue.
That would be such a commitment to a booking, right? Wouldn't it? You say to Carnegie Hall, like 10,001 hours away, you're going to have a superstar.
I'd like to book my show in advance, please. I've got 9,988 hours left, so
yeah. Right now, I've got no experience, but in 10,000 hours, I'm going to have 10,000 hours of experience.
Just wait.
Yeah. I've read Malcolm Gladwell. But no, and look, Revisionist History, his podcast, I think the first season of Revisionist History was excellent. And then I think it probably was,
you could say first kind of, two, maybe.
He's kind of lost he's forgotten what the original premise was, which was going back and looking at things that we think of in a certain way and we're wrong. And now it's just him, Malcolm Gladwell, holding court. And there's nothing wrong with that, but it's just a shame because the original premise was so good. Malcolm Gladwell and Bill Simmons, they're kind of in the same boat for me. I am mostly frustrated by what they do, but I also cannot stop taking in everything that they do.
Sure. Oh, man.
But on that note, should we make the very smooth transition to our interview with Josh Apiafi? Welcome back to the Big Chill podcast. We are delighted to be joined by our guest this week, Josh Apiafi, who will probably be most familiar to our listeners as a presenter on Sky Sports Racing, but also as one of the co-founders of Rewards for Racing. Josh, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us. I know pre-recording we were having a little conversation and touching on a number of the different roles that you've held over the course of your career, and it's been so varied that it's a little bit difficult to know where the starting point is. So maybe it's best, as difficult of a question as this is, if we start by just you giving a little bit of a summary of how you've managed to get to where you are now.
Or maybe just how you got into racing to start, maybe.
Good man. That's
we can split it up, make it a little easier.
That's a great
segment one.
Yeah, exactly. There's a little story about how I got into horse racing. I found horse racing or riding of horses was what my white knuckle sport as a child. It wasn't. I do now, but I had no definitive love of a horse back then. All I wanted to do was go as fast as possible over as big fences as possible, since the age of 5. My parents went into it. We'd just moved to a little village in the middle of England, and down the road from our house was a riding school, and Mum took. I was the eldest of 4 kids. Took us down there. I was 5, and away we went. And like I say, that was all I wanted to do was feel the wind in my hair. I was about to say I did have hair back then, or the wind in my afro, as it probably was back then. And just fell in love with that side of it. And I think I was about 9 years old. My dad was a pilot, a commercial airline pilot then, and he was the first black pilot. Actually, we'll come on to some D&I stuff and what drives me. And of course, that was a huge element of him being the sort of first black commercial pilot in the UK. Anyway, he was flying one day and. Or turned up at the airport to fly a group of tourists down to Malaga, I think it was, down in Spain. And his co-pilot turned up and he had a shiner of a black eye. And Dad, thinking that this guy had been in a fight, sort of went, hop yourself up to the cockpit and we'll have a chat about that, but don't let the passengers see the black eye. Anyway, they take off, fly the plane down to Malaga and get up to altitude, and he turned around and he says, okay, what's the story behind the black eye? And the guy turned around to him and he said, you probably won't believe me, but I got it riding in the Grand National last week. So For your listeners that don't know, it's the biggest race in England. It's 4.5 miles over 30 fences. It's the race, the equivalent of the Melbourne Cup, the race that stops the UK nation. Everyone has a bet on it, and away you go. Anyway, he was back then. Pilots earned well above the average wage in the UK. He had enough money to own a horse himself, and that horse was good enough to run in the race. He rode it. It fell. He got a bit of a clouting, and 2 days later he was flying with Dad. Anyway, Dad then turned around and sort of goes click, click, click. What's my son going to do for a career? He just rides horses. Racing then became apparent, and he asked him if he'd take me racing. And 3 days later, I turned up at a little unknown track on the border of Wales called Ludlow. And I walked through the gates and just went, that is what I want to do. I want to go at 35 mile an hour over big old obstacles. And that was it. I was sold.
I don't know which part of that story would worry me more, either turning up to get on a flight and seeing that the co-pilot had a black eye, or turning up to get onto a flight and seeing that I recognize the co-pilot as having been a Grand National jockey.
Or if you saw my dad.
Or even worse, if he's the jockey that you knew fell in the race. That's not giving you much confidence right there, as he's going to put your life in his hands.
Absolutely. And that was about 80... Geez, how old am I? So I was born in 75. That was sort of 84, I'd say, 85, yeah.
And so then you pursued a career as an amateur jockey. We've had, obviously, a couple of guests on who've followed a similar path, but what was that experience like for you?
Hungry. So I left school at 16 and did my GCSEs and then left. I could have gone on I was the only one, I think, out of my friendship group. Actually, there was 2 of us that left school at the age of 16, and I moved 250 miles away from home. Thought nothing of that. Again, my dad sort of comes in this conversation. I remember him dropping me off. He's going to sound really hard now, but he was a little bit, but it was the making of me. When he dropped me off, he said, "Listen, I was 16 years old." He said, "You're not coming back." And I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "You can come back and visit, but you're not going to live at home again. This. It was the whole off you go," and it went. And I sort of copped on. I went, "Okay, this is it." And I was off, and obviously I still remember that conversation 30 years later. And it's another thing that drives you, that you are trying to, you're forever proving yourself, even if it's just to yourself, let alone anybody else,
And so you're a parent now. Do you think you'd be able to send that sort of clear message or ultimatum to your children now that you're on the other side of the fence?
My kids burn pasta. So I'd say there's probably a few life skills that I need to teach before that happens. And I also think the world is a very, very different place too. And it is interesting being a parent, that I don't think the world was that different when my dad and my mum were growing up. The way they grew up was not dissimilar to the way I grew up in the 80s and early 90s. I started working in 1991. Whereas you look now of the world that my teenage kids live in is a monstrously different world of connectivity, of how easily accessible everything is, and also that, in 2 clicks you could be speaking to anyone or anything, and what controls that had. I mean, we had we're speaking now, and we're speaking for free. If I was speaking to someone in the States, it was costing about £5 a minute when I was growing up. So, and there would be a delay of about 10 seconds, whereas this is, and technology is fantastic, but it's made being a parent ever difficult because we didn't go through it. It's probably what I was trying to get across there, that my parents went through a lot of things that I went through when they were kids, whereas I've never been through a lot of the things that my kids are going through. So we're learning, and we're also trying to discipline and guide them along the way as well,
Yeah, so it's interesting you mentioned that, because we had Nathan Horrocks on, and he did a short film the fall where he kind of addressed this instant connectivity and being a jockey in today's age, with all the criticism and the social media, and being a jockey when you were and now seeing the jockeys now, how different and how much more difficult do you think it is to be an everyday jockey?
We're always going to say that it was far more difficult in our day than it is today. You hear it from no matter what sport you're talking about. They'll say, look at golf. They had hickory shafts and cork balls, and and all this kind of stuff. But what was the difference? Okay, let me give you the difference in Nathan and my day. So we're talking sort of in the early 90s, and that there was over 800 jockeys back then. Now there are 300 jockeys in the UK. There were 1,000 race meetings in the UK. There are now 1,500. So you've got more meetings and less jockeys. So, so there are more opportunities. Back then, we had no education whatsoever in terms of, let alone mental health, physical health, diets. Now, in every single race meeting, you'll find a nutritionist. There'll be a physio at every single one of them. There are various online courses. I mean, they're looked after so well. I mean, Lester Piggott, the most famous jockey probably ever in the world, used to live on a cigar and a glass of champagne and a cup of coffee in the morning. That was it. And because he did, and people go, well, that's just horrendous. He's just turned 90, so he's not done too bad. But in terms of how they're now seen as athletes, we were never seen as athletes. If we started doing, if someone walked into the weighing room and started stretching, I mean, they would have it ripped out of them in terms of the mickey taken out of them, whereas now everyone goes for a run when they get there. They know exactly what they need to do in terms of core strength. The rise of the female jockey has been fantastic because what you've now got are people that aren't malnutritioned, trying to do a job. Because they can do the weight a lot easier. They are so much. They're physically stronger than the guys. So it's a huge difference. I think it's legions away. I think the safety factor that's come in as well in terms of the back protectors. We wore back protectors, but it was like pieces of cardboard you'd put across yourself and stick a bit of tape around, a bit like me trying to put a nappy on back in the day. But now, it's all the hat has changed. And I think that'll be the next one in terms of what do we look forward at. And Nathan has got obviously with Jockey Cam, what is the natural progress of that is to actually, rather than stick a camera on a hat, is actually to look at what the helmets are. Now, they have become far better but they haven't grown so much in the 30 years since we were riding. If you looked at what the F1 drivers were wearing 30 years ago and what they wear now, compared to what a jockey wears now and a jockey wore then, there's hardly any difference on a jockey front. So I do believe that in the next 5 years, there will be a development of a helmet, which would include would include a camera, would include speed ratings, would include heart rate, would include concussion data. So and all that, at the moment, they're trying to judge in about 10 different things. And I would hope, because I know some of the protagonists within it, including Nathan, that they come together and build a helmet for the 21st century that could carry that data.
When you became a jockey or wanted to go into it, whether it was like point to point or actually racing over the fences, did you think the reality, so you had the expectation of going fast, going over fences, maybe seeing a black eye on someone, but what was the reality like when you were actually in it? Did it make it more negative? Did you still love it? Did you continue to fall in love with it? Like how was the reality of being a jockey against the expectation as kind of like a childhood dream to do it?
Very good question, because it's a bit like meeting your hero, isn't it? And sometimes you meet your heroes and they're absolute, they're allowed to swear, but they're absolute dickheads, which I've done before. And then other times they can be absolutely the most amazing people you could meet. And then you find out your hero probably isn't a famous sports star. It's one of your best mates. But in terms of what it was like, it more than meets what you expect. It is the greatest ride you'll ever go on. And back then you would ride anything. The worst horse in the world, you couldn't wait to stick the colours on and ride it over a fence. And it might have more letters than numbers in terms of its ability, which means it's fallen or unseated or pulled up. But you would still get on it thinking you were going to beat it. But that's the the naivety of youth, I think, along the way. And your body, after a good few slaps, goes, okay, this might hurt. Whereas when you're young and flexible, and flexibility is definitely wasted on the youth of today and of yesterday, I would say. It's one of those things that it surpassed anything that I could ever have dreamed. But then what comes with it is, and being an amateur jockey, you don't get paid. So I was lucky enough to have a nice upbringing. My mum was a teacher, my dad was a pilot, and you sort of do. They didn't financially support me when I went off to become a jockey. I worked in the yard. Granted, I worked for the champion trainer back then and learned a heck of a lot. But you're earning, my first wage, or my first and continual wage packet for the first year was £37 a week. Of which nowadays isn't a decent bottle of wine, let alone anything else. But that was living in their hostel that they had at the yard. I wouldn't have changed it. I was the richest man in the world, in my opinion, because I was so happy doing what I was getting. I'd have done it for nothing and just ate Frosties if I had to. So I thought it was brilliant. And the racing element of it, why did I stop? I began to fall out of love with it because I only rode 10 winners. So it wasn't like I didn't, it was a drug to try and find the next one, but they were few and far between compared to people that ride them all the time. And we didn't have the nutritional advice. So, I was walking around 3 stone lighter than I am now. It wasn't healthy. I knew it wasn't good. And I was riding pretty poor horses. So every time you get a slap and you end up in hospital. And when you're tall and lanky, you don't bounce. When you're small and stocky, you do tend to bounce more. So, so that was the sort of the love of horses came more apparent, but the adrenaline kick only lasts so long when you end up in the back of an ambulance.
I'm interested in a point that you sort of made there, and it's a topic that we've discussed with both Sean and Nathan when we've had them on, but obviously having only ridden 10 winners and with undoubtedly some sort of growing pressure in terms of wanting more successful rides so that you can further your career, is there any level of jealousy within the sort of jockey fraternity, or do you feel like there's just a healthy rivalry there and an understanding that you're all just playing just the same game and that's how it goes?
Interesting question, Ed, and it's probably I'm not going to dodge it, but you'd get a more interesting answer, or an more honest answer from, or experienced answer from Nathan and Sean, who wanted to be professional jockeys. I always knew I was never going to be a professional jockey. I was doing it. I just followed my passion and my love and just saw where it went. It was never. I knew I was going to be too big. I knew I was never going to ride for more than 4 years because I was going to get too heavy. So it was, like I say, because I wasn't following that dream, I thought I might want to become a trainer, but then I took one look at that and went, absolutely no chance do I want to become a racehorse trainer. So it goes, okay, what are you going to do? And that's where I spent a long time on trying to find out what I wanted to do. And I think if you look at throughout my entire career, I've always gone to people and organisations, or I've done stuff myself that has challenged the norm. Don't take this is what should happen and has happened for 50 years and continue it. So Martin Pipe, who I went to when I was 16, the trainer, he was twice as good as anyone else. He'd train 230 winners a year, and the next person to him would train 100 winners. And because he brought in interval training, which people just thought he was cheating. He had all sorts. He had TV cameras down there, reporters thinking he was cheating, the whole 9 yards. And he wasn't. He was just better than everyone else. Betfair, same sort of thing. Everyone said, "Oh, this is illegal. You can't do it." The bookmakers were crying foul. Of course, 21 years later, it's still there as one of the leading ways to bet in the UK. So challenging the norm has always been my sort of route, but I think it really grew within me within the time where I spent going, okay, I've gone down this route of trying to ride, don't want to train, what am I going to do? Haven't got an A-level, can't go to university. couldn't get a job for life and no money, and eventually turned around and went, Josh, you need to go and do something yourself.
Now, before we move on to the post racing, I guess last question is, do you have a favorite race that, you know, when you sit down for Christmas dinner, you know, and you want to impress someone, you tell them this story about this great race you had, and you had a 60-1 shot you brought to the win. You know, do you have that one that you always go to, your favorite?
Not in terms of me riding, Frank. It was, I mean, I've had some amazing.
Come on, you rode 10 winners. You got to have one good story there.
You're so humble, Josh.
First one's your best.
It's 10 more than we've gotten combined.
For me, first one's your best one, and basically I was struggling with the weight. I rode this horse. It was for Martin Pipe. I'd left the yard, or left the working for him a couple of years before, and I don't even think Martin Pipe knows this. I'd never been to this race course where this horse was running, so didn't have a clue where we were going. And because I was struggling to do the weight, I had to get in the sauna before we got there and go for a run. And I'd never stepped foot on the course before I stepped out there on this horse. And this course goes here, there, and everywhere. And it was just pot luck that I went in the. I basically followed them all until I could see the winning post, and then kicked on, and it ended up winning, and away you go. So yeah, so this is like confession. Sorry, Martin.
Well, I know he's an avid listener, so I'm sure that will come as a big disappointment to him. You've touched on already that transition from being a jockey to the business side of the sport. And I know you forged your own path at first, but then you were also involved in the very early days of Betfair. We had Scott Ferguson on, who I know joined Betfair sort of early on in Australia, and he described that as a bit of being like in the Wild West. What was your experience like in those first few years at Betfair?
Unbelievable. I actually employed Scott, so he's a top man. I haven't seen him for a while, but no, I was one of the first ones. I was the first man off the boat when we went down to Australia, and we employed Scott to oversee things for us down there. And no, listen, it was my most favourite 5 years. I was there for 7. It was my most favourite 5 years of my entire working life, and I know a lot of people who were there within that period have struggled since to try and find that buzz again. It's a bit like when you see jockeys retiring and try and find that adrenaline buzz again. I've been very comfortable with the stuff that I've done since, and really enjoy the stuff. You know, I've always had a rule in life of as you can tell, of following passion before paycheck. And I think if you do, the paycheck will follow, because you're going to overly do the job that you're passionate about anyway. So, but those early years were brilliant. It didn't matter who was there. We were all the same. I was the average age the whole way through the business. So I went there at 26 and I think 25, 26. And again, continued through it. To see it grow was pretty amazing, but because there was no book that was been written that says this is what you do when you've got a fast growing business, or growing as fast as we were. The only people at the time that grew as fast were eBay, and it's sort of like, and they'd got up to sort of 3,000 employees within 2 years, and I sort of know why we grew the way we did. And I think, like I say, for 5 years it was brilliant, and then it became too big for what it is, because we only needed sort of 800 people and we got to 1,500. But some of the stuff we did was if whatever our competitors in the gaming world did, we didn't go anywhere near. So if they sponsored over here or they advertised here, we'd go over here. We just wanted it to be completely different and ask that question, because otherwise your media over here costs so much money, and over here it doesn't. Now it means you can go and trial and error 10 different things over here, and off you go, and people go, "Wow, Josh, it was amazing. You were, director of horse racing and head of marketing and stuff like that." And I went, no, it was easy. And they went, "What do you mean it was easy?" I said, "Well, listen, one, you've got a fantastic product. The best salesmen in the world are ones that have got to sell the crap product, not the best product. This is an easy sell. Yes, it was difficult because it was something new, so you had to explain the concept before, and then the selling points of that. But if you've got that, and we were led by data, and I think we were the first business in the sector that was very data driven. And so my analysts would turn around to me and go, right, Josh, we need more males aged 27 to 34 with an income of this, that live in this type of area, that this type of job, that boom, boom, boom. I then go to my media buyers and go, I want to purchase media that have got the demographic profile of 27 to 34. And it was just using, and we knew that we were then, excuse this phrase, peeing in the right pond to get the right people to come on board. Whereas beforehand, it was like, let's splash brand everywhere. And, because they had lots more marketing budget than we did and hope something sticks. Whereas we had to be very targeted about what we were after.
As someone who's worked quite a bit with startups in the tech industry, I'm quite interested in the point that you made there about the realization that the company was becoming too big. When did you realize that this was becoming an issue, and exactly how was it impacting the business itself?
Cool. So we went from speedboat to Titanic, basically. Whereas beforehand, if there was an opportunity, bang. If you said to me, right, Josh, there's this opportunity tomorrow, I could do it. Whereas the next time, it's then a bit like running things by committee. And where did we went wrong from being too generous? And that's a weird analogy. And that analogy comes from that after sort of 3 years, we had this huge backlog of tech work that needed to happen, as well as other stuff that was expanding. And when I first joined, and like I say, there was under 50 people there, that we didn't earn hardly any money, but we got given shares equivalent to what your salary would be. Now, that continued throughout, even that the share price would rise depending on where they were in terms of their investment. But what happens then is you get people sat on options that don't vest for 3 years, and so this backlog of work that needed to happen, what they should have done is paid for the freelancers to come in, pay them more money, and clear the backlog. But what we didn't, we employed people to come and basically clear the backlog. And once the backlog was clear, and let's say in a year, these people still had 2 years of options to vest. So they're going to go, no, this is my job. They have to justify their existence within the workplace, and then things start getting political, and this is my job, and that's my... And for the first 5 years, no matter whose job it was, if the phone was ringing, you pick it up, and you ran. And I'm not naive enough to think that it could perhaps stay that way, but I know I'm, by the sound of it, just not dissimilar to you, whereas I know what I'm good at, especially now I'm in my mid-40s, I'm very good at identifying a problem, and I might sound big-headed, I'm good at raising the cash or having the cash to invest in that and get it up to profitability within its first 2 years. Then you need someone else to come along and run that business properly, and I need to go and look for something else. And that's so the older you get, the more wiser you should get, and you also understand yourself a lot more. And that's also when you look at businesses of what happened there. And on my exit interview, like I say, this was with the two founders, who I still know personally. I own racehorses with one of them still today. They said, why are you leaving? I said, well, there's 1,500 people here and there should be 800. And they sort of laughed. 2 years later, they brought in a new chief executive who sacked 800 people and went back to about a level of 800. So it was going to come, but that was the mistake it made. But you only ever hear about all the great things with these great companies. But when you get in behind the teeth of an eBay or a Facebook or wherever it's going to go and be, you'll find out there were some huge mistakes along the way, and you learn more. You will always learn more from your mistakes than you ever will from your successes.
So going from that, with obviously you're on the outside looking in now, I guess, with Betfair in that extent, but the way the betting industry is now, do you think that Betfair still has differentiators with the exchanges, or do you think maybe it's missing some tricks when it comes to a lot of the high street bookies went to the more casino based stuff with fixed odds betting terminals, etc.? Do you think Betfair still has kind of a uniqueness to it, or do you think everyone's caught up with it and it's just become part of the normal betting space now?
as an old Betfarian, so I'm coming at it that way because Betfair are a client within one of my businesses, but I equally, I think they respect the fact that I was there 20 years ago, so they understand that. It's a very different place. Listen, it's owned in a big group that owns Paddy Power, it owns Sky Bet, and it now, for me, it's another betting brand. I think the exchange, you can only have a look at the liquidity levels across the exchange platform are tiny compared to what they once were. I think it's slightly unloved because it's a bit like when you look at airlines that then go and decide. British Airways decided that they'd start a cheap flights division called Go probably about 20 years ago at the same time. It's very difficult to run a high margin business and have a low margin product that runs alongside it. And I think it just that the exchange, the sportsbook makes far much more money. It's a brand that has then, they're just different products within it. Whereas when we came along, when I started the conversation about Betfair with you guys, I was saying that we always looked in a different area. So people would go, do the casino, earn more money. And we went, we just don't want to be a one-armed bandit casino like everyone else. You can just lock them in. It would just look like you're trying to rinse the customer for a bit more cash. So what we then developed was exchange poker, different exchange game. So you can play poker using the exchange model rather than just lobbing in a roulette wheel. So that was the great thinking that we had in terms of what does the core. We stayed true and core to our products. The sports books were our enemy, which is probably where it comes from me. Whereas now it sits along as bedfellows within the same business.
So it's entirely possible that you wouldn't be able to do a lot of what you were doing back then just because of new regulations and restrictions. But when looking at the current landscape, you obviously have Paddy Power sort of leading the way in terms of the creativity of their marketing and advertising. But both from a marketing and product standpoint, where do you think you could make still the biggest impact on some of those businesses now in terms of being different and unique?
So the marketing and advertising strategy, I've never worked for a big company or part of a big conglomerate, even though I've got a Sky email address now, but it doesn't. I'm a freelancer there. But I loved it when we were different. I love being different, and I love challenging the norm. The moment you stop doing that, that's not what my skill set is. In terms of product, I would love to take the exchange away actually from sitting alongside those, so it can go and be the challenger brand that it once was. It no longer is. It's a product. Looking at the landscape, obviously what's happened is it's gone from 20 or 30 bookies and companies down to the big superpowers that we see now. They're pretty much of a likeness. Bet365 bet to smaller margins, so you get better prices as a consumer. And they're all about turnover, but they're a private company, owned by one family, compared to the rest being PLCs. Where product-wise, I would love for the small stake win bid bet. Where is horse racing's or betting's lotto style bet that you could then engage, especially on a horse racing front, that you could then engage the masses with it. It might be that you have to pick the first 5 on a Saturday afternoon and you win £1 million. Whatever it is, we need to find it, because that's what that engages everyone. Everyone still does the national lottery. There is obviously huge margin in it as well for everyone, so you can have your distribution partners and give them a good kick in it. It was one of the things I was hoping that the Tote were going to look at. I think they still might in years to come. They've looked at their value element over the last 2 years in terms of what their takeout is, and they match SP and stuff like that. But equally, I think that's just catching up compared to what could possibly happen is when you start to overtake them or look at something different. Don't try and be a bookie. Whereas if you try and be a bookie, you can't play in their playground unless you've got hundreds of millions of marketing budget. Go and be different and be proud to be different.
So you've mentioned the Tote, and I don't want to overlook rewards for racing, but you were part of the group that raised the money and bought the Tote a few years ago. I'd be interested in knowing how that opportunity came about and what the interest was specifically in the tote.
Yep.
The tote as a concept might be more familiar to many people outside the UK, almost as that is the only way of betting on horse racing in many countries around the world, but had perhaps become to be seen as a little bit outdated in the UK in a betting industry that had become much more advanced with a number of different markets. So maybe this was almost seen as an opportunity to salvage the tote itself. I don't know if that's necessarily the right way to put it.
Well, it probably was. It was a little bit like the Betfair Exchange. It was something that I'd had passion, knew that it would it needed modernisation, it needed dusting off, giving a new look to a new direction. Fred had bought it and I think had fallen out of love with it, to be honest with you, because he thought he was assisting racing, and I think he did. And racing basically just laughed. And it was, I found it very sad, the relationship that Fred was offered with the sport. It obviously came up for sale. And it was something that I was approached by Alex Frost, who was an ex-Merrill Lynch vice president, to look at, raising the cash, but then secondly, he's a huge racehorse owner himself, very successful himself, to bring along a group of wealthy individuals with a passion for horse racing, to look at bringing it back to racing as such, and to look at what could it possibly be a revenue driver, and where it could never have worked when it was owned by Fred, and that's not just because it was Fred, it was owned by a bookmaker. So I think it's gradually getting to where I hoped it would look, which is it's not a brand that is going to take on Bet365, but it's a fantastic product for Bet365 to sell because it's got a lot of margin in it. So, they've got their closed garden of 20 whatever million customers in the UK. They should be, here's your you've placed your 3 or 4 bets on a Saturday and you're given the option of doing the play spot. Or equally, when you do the play spot with them, we could, that data can inform. If you come out the play spot, you've already given the data that you fancy these horses in a later race. So I think it's a great product through a partner base rather than actually taking them on as a brand, taking other bookies on as a brand. I think internationally, we've seen Whirlpool come about this year, which I think is a great initiative. It still means that the pool is hosted in Hong Kong, but you would hope in years to come that the UK tote would be strong enough that the Whirlpool would be hosted with them. So, the cash comes here rather than us going into the liquid cash. At the moment, it's slightly the tail wagging the dog. It's where the customers are and the host pool there rather than where the product host pool is. And I think the product, and that's what needs to happen over a period of time, is that host pool should be where the product is. So I still think it's got a lot of work to do to get where it needs to get to and also to become profitable. I think they're just about to finish paying for the tote from Fred Doan. But they're now setting up, I do believe, because I also own a horse with Alex, who's the managing director of the tote, that they have got these partnership networks now set up, and now they're in a position to move forward.
Yeah, I think certainly for me, and it's probably the case for a lot of people, the tote had almost become seen as a sort of legacy institution within racing, and something that I only thought of and interacted with when I was physically at a race course.
Because their digital offering has been so poor. I mean, ridiculously poor. And also, it's racing. It could be racing's lottery. That is the place. The lottery is a pool. Betfair Exchange is a pool. They've just all got different pricing mechanisms. So, and when I said that to Alex when I first got there and their shareholders, I said, listen, you should be looking to buy the exchange in 5 years' time because it is all about pool liquidity with different pricing models along the side. But then when you use the algorithms, you can if you've got a core bunch of liquidity and you use different algorithms for different prices, you and I should be able to go and place a bet on a horse coming 4th in a race on the tote because there's an algorithm around the liquidity of what's been done in the win and place market. So that's the kind of stuff. And there's a company called Longitude, which is owned by NASDAQ, that has got that kind of technology that they're beginning to roll out around the world. So I think there is a lot of new tech out there which will come into play over the next 4 to 5 years and become more front of mind. And also, as the gambling regulator starts squeezing down a bit more on, as we've seen, not only with fob teasers, as you alluded to earlier on, but also on gaming regs full stop, that the tote and pool betting as such, and in that way you would call that exchange betting, it's open, it's clean. You know where the transfer of money is coming from. It's got, you know your customer, you know every single pound where it's come from. So, and you're not betting against the company in either of them. That's probably the one thing I haven't mentioned and should have done, both with the tote and with Betfair. It's not me versus you, the customer. It's you versus you taking on the world, or you can go in as a syndicate together. So, the commission is taken out before we even get there. So we don't care whether, we want you to win. So that's the great thing. What can we do to assist you to win? No other bookmaking company outside of the tote and Betfair could ever say that.
I always found it interesting because it was 2011, I think the UK government sold it off. So about a decade ago, I think it was. And it was always described as the fairer way to bet. It was always like, this will be better for you than kind of fixed odds or SP or anything like that. Do you think, but obviously you mentioned also like a high margin aspect to it as well as a business. Do you think that was, I wouldn't say marketing spiel, but it is genuinely a fairer way, isn't it? Because when I worked in Ladbrokes, and they actually had some interesting deviations to the place pot. They had like the tote jackpot, the Super Six. I remember being one of those, like £2 on a Saturday, you could win like $1 million plus. Like, do you think it was all completely fair when they marketed it that way? It's like fairer, even though you just mentioned the high margin side.
Fair is an interesting line. Is it fairer? I don't know whether it's fairer or not, but what it is it's a true reflection of a price once you get to a certain level of liquidity. So exactly like Betfair, and the tote would be the same. It doesn't matter what that takeout is; it's going to be a reflection of yin and yang, because these are where one, if it gets bet here, it's going to drift here, and across the board. Whereas on a fixed odds type of thing, yes, there is the liquidity issues in terms of, if you're backing this favourite, the outsiders are going to come out, or vice versa, they're going to come in. But it's far more clearer, open when it comes to the tote or a bet or an exchange bet. And also, I think what you've also got there, Sam, is that if you've come from a fixed odds background, and what I've not worked in is when you've got multiple liabilities coming into a win market. So Betfair and pool markets, that's all about this one event. And what we all love doing an ACCA, and that kind of stuff. But that's a bookmaker's got to equate, if this second favourite wins here and it's just a normal market, they might have a rolling liability coming in here from Frankie Dettori riding 5 winners or whatever it works out to be, which you wouldn't naturally get in or their liability that you wouldn't actually get in a pool.
So I think, those are areas of your career that we could speak about for hours, but, arguably the most important and impactful work you've done in your career is when it comes to diversity and inclusion in the sport of racing. We had Sean Levy on, and it was one of the areas that we spoke to him about, and I certainly don't want to speak on his behalf, but I think we were very interested to hear, and perhaps surprised, that he had never felt as if it had been an obstacle within his own particular career. I'd be interested to hear what you thought were the sort of major obstacles facing the sport of racing, and where the biggest improvements could be made.
Yeah, it's interesting. Massive question there. Where to start? I mean, I'll pick it off as we go. The Sean one's an interesting one. So I interviewed Sean on a series that I did on Sky called Leading the Way, and off cam, he gave probably the same answers as he gave you. So first up, I then turned around to Sean. My return of serve off cam was, so why are you the only one? If it is that easy and there aren't the barriers, why are you the only one? Why is it not reflective of society, which is 14%? So of which he didn't have an answer. And so let me sort of start with where I'm going to go back a little bit in terms of racing and diversity and inclusion. And I've obviously been a non-white person working in a white man's, or principally a white man's actually world, or a white person's world, since I was 16, but with a "I'll show you" attitude, which only a certain percentage of people just have. But that's what I wanted to. That's sort of how I was born and brought up, as you've probably seen from when I was talking about my dad. And I think if you look at all the racism back through history, it is gradually getting better until a certain American president arrived not so long ago. But let's ignore that. But if you look through, so when my dad first went to America, and you're talking to me about horse racing, but you've got to put this into some kind of context here. When he first went to the States, he had to sit on the back of the bus. And within his lifetime, the president of the free world, or the ruler of the free world, ended up being a black man for 2 sessions. An amazing feat. But you've got to look back then at what happened then. And if you look at the race riots through the 70s in the UK, so I was brought up in the 80s. I got plenty when I was a kid. But when you get to sort of 6 foot, and I don't think I've ever been in a physical fight since I was about 20 years old, and because I can look really mean, but I'm as soft as anything. But equally, when you're 6 foot tall, not many people, especially in the racing world, where most people, the majority of people, are going to be smaller than you. You're not going to get it. But that's not to say I haven't experienced racism within it. But the reason why I've just given you that sort of context is when I speak, Rishi Prasad is a brilliant broadcaster in the UK across all sports. He's Trinidadian, and him and I are the similar age. I think he's a year older than me. And we have had same experiences of where we have been racially both abused, but then also that, I was asked in a meeting only 2 months ago by a senior chairman in the sport of racing, and they said, "What do we call you people now, Josh?" These are the draconian views that are still around. But when you speak to Sean, or you speak to another lady I interviewed, was a lady named Solskaer Varma. She's the director of racing at Aintree, where the Grand National is, and she's of Indian descent. They were brought up in the 90s, so it was a decade on, and the late 90s at that. So I do think it is getting easy. So Sean was the same. So I do think there is less racism around, or in-your-face racism around. I do think there's some unconscious bias, and people don't like to think there's unconscious bias. But if out of the top 500 executives in British horse racing, at the start of the year, there was one that was non-white, and that was Solskaer. I'm delighted to say there's 3. There's still only 3 out of 500, but we've done some, the work we're doing is changing. And that's just at the sort of leadership level. And I'm seeing more, I'm hopefully pushing more diversity and bringing more diverse faces and people into the sport outside of the stable yard. Because in the stable yard, it's become quite a diverse place, which is brilliant. But then why wasn't that diversity spreading across the sport? And one of the major things I was in a meeting this morning is, our marketing brand has been the sport of kings. And that really is outdated. Because it separates people now. That you speak to Gen Z, and I've learned a lot out of doing Gen Z focus groups over the last 18 months, that they don't see class and they don't see colour, which they naturally did in the last few decades, absolutely. And when you go racing, and it doesn't matter where you go in the world, there's this enclosure, that enclosure, and that enclosure, and that all stems back from wealth. Because it's more expensive the closer you get to the winning line. Whereas Gen Z go, no, we pay our 20 quid or 50 quid to come in, and they're expecting that everyone is the same. And it's like dress codes. They don't see dress codes. Why are you telling me what I have to wear? Because I express my own personality through my clothes. Obviously not me personally right now. But although I'm wearing a golf top and I love golf, but they're saying, you're telling me I have to wear a tie, and I mean I still wear a tie going racing because that's what I've always gone and done. But I don't expect everybody else to be wearing a tie. It doesn't matter if someone comes in a smart pair of jeans that's probably cost them a few £100, or someone comes in a scruffy pair of £20, second-hand trousers. He can get in, but he can't. It's peculiar. So, and Grade 1 race courses like York this year have started no dress code. So it is coming. But boy, moving the mountain in terms of the sport embracing diversity and inclusion. And what am I trying to do? I set out, I didn't have a midlife crisis and buy a sports car or have an affair. I decided that I'd return my focus into the sport that I love to make sure, after reading the book Legacy, which is the All Blacks book, which I'm pretty sure you've all read. If you haven't, definitely read it. Is that you want to leave your home as good, if not better, than when you found it. And I'm nervous that I'm going to leave my sport in hopefully many years to come, and it wouldn't be in a better place because it's not reflective of society. And the only way it's going to grow is if it becomes reflective of society and embraces inclusion far more than it does. Because how do you feel welcome if no one else in the room looks like you? And I've learned to live with it and to sort of go, well, I'll show you. And so it's driven me in a certain direction. But the overwhelming majority of people will walk into that room and walk straight out. And the first time I took my dad to the Cheltenham Festival, which still remains a very white occasion compared to a Royal Ascot, probably because where it is within the country, and also, that jump racing is a far more rural sport, or backed rural sport. We walked into a crowd of 75,000 people, and Dad, this was like sort of early 2000, he turned to me and he went, "Not many brothers here, are there?" I went, "No, Dad, there's not. But come and meet Rishi, who's one of my really good mates." I kid you not, there was probably 4 of us out of 75,000 people at that day. So has it got any better? Slightly, but you won't get over 100 people there that are of an ethnic minority out of 70-odd thousand. So there is a lot of work to do. And how do you do it? When people go, the easiest way to make it more diverse is to put diversity there. In other words, if people can see it's diverse, then more people attract. So I'm trying to make the sport look more diverse because I think we have a role in the media to do that. But then the first people that walk through the door, it's perhaps not what I'm putting up. So I'm making more of Sean Levy, but he's the only black jockey. I'm making more of Suleika Varma, but she's the only. So when they do walk in, I've got to make sure that Sean and Suleika are at the front of the house so they feel welcome. Otherwise, they're going to go, "What is this place?"
Yeah, it's a really interesting concept because as you're saying it, I'm thinking kind of what you're saying is the better. How can you, I guess, fast forward it to get to that? Is it putting more diversity, not technically on screen, but in those areas like jockeys, trainers, presenters, or is it putting more diversity into the crowd that's watching the on air? And then what way would drive the diversity more? Is having more people following the sport or having more people up front to then attract more diversity to follow? Or is it the other way? If you see what I'm saying.
And with a couple of answers. First one is, racing is attractive to a diverse audience. And people, when I say that. And walk into any bookmaker shop. You walk into a bookmaker shop in the middle of a city, it's the most diverse place. It looks like the YMCA or the Village People. You've got all sorts of creeds, colours, religions, the whole lot in there. But they don't go horse racing. So they're betting on the horse racing, but they don't go there. The Far Eastern market love horse racing, love betting. But why don't they come in the UK? Why don't they come horse racing? So it's not the product. I don't believe that you can change things overnight by parachuting in diversity. You've got to look, so this is the strategy that I've gone down for the sport on behalf of the sport and did it myself, and I'm delighted to say that the sport has now funded me and my associates to continue it is to look at the pathways into the sport. And there are 3 pathways into this sport, I believe. Keeping it simple, there's a pathway if you want to be a rider, which has been massively covered, and it's been a very successful pathway for many a year. But the other 2 they struggle with, which is the pathways if you want to be a fan, and if you want to work in the sport and you're not a rider. The overwhelming majority of people, in fact, off the scale, 99.99% of people that work in the sport that are in a non-riding element don't come in as their first job into horse racing. It's their second or third job before they arrive here. So entry-level jobs. So one of the things we're looking at is an industry-wide apprentice program to run out, as in not in terms of jockey apprentice, in terms of apprenticeships within the organisations within the sport. And then if you look at the future fan, every football club, every golf club, every other sport has a junior fan base section, and racing doesn't. Now, you could say that it's because those sports are participant sports. So, and that is one of racing's where we struggle, that you can't watch the Royal Ascot and then go to your local riding school and pretend you're Frankie Dettori on Monday, but you can watch the Open Golf and go to your driving range and think you're Tiger Woods. So it hasn't got that petition. Why? What are you going to fall in love with? And that is hopefully them falling in love with. Yes, there's the betting element, but as a you can't do that on a teenage front. Of course you can't. So you've got to look at how do I get you to love horse racing, the spectacle of it all, the social aspect of it all. That you've got action all afternoon. It's on all the time. There's all these great things that any time of the day you can actually interact with this. There are those sort of things. So you've got to look at, okay, so where is our engagement program? And unfortunately, racing hasn't had one. We're currently building a pretty basic one, which includes a young person's racing club. We have this great thing called Racing to School that brings 15,000 kids a year to the races, but then sort of stops after that experiential day. So the next stage is going to be those kids can bring their parents back for a sort of show and tell day. Then you go on to the third step of young person's racing club that goes up to their sort of fair paying and of betting age, really, at 18, because then you're an adult and away you go. And unfortunately, the commercial organisations within our sport, and it's only got worse since COVID, because they've got to get their revenue in, have got to look at the fair paying customer and not the customer of 10 years' time.
You've mentioned golf there, and obviously I think that's probably a natural sport to draw some comparisons with, just because of the historical profiles and demographics that have been involved in the sports themselves. But these are obviously issues faced by sport as a whole, as we've seen this week with Azim Rafiq and cricket. But where have you seen other sports make progress and examples that perhaps have been set where you feel as if the racing industry can follow?
Rather than a good question, that's a tough question. But a good one is a good one with it, Ed. I haven't got Tiger Woods and I haven't got Lewis Hamilton, so I haven't got faces. The headline or the Michael Jordan. The big headline is a diverse face. I think my Tiger Woods is probably 10 years old at the moment. I think it'll be about 6 or 7 years' time. I'll see that coming through because we're investing in the future. Hopefully that's not too late. But it's going to take that period coming through, and also the sport to be ready. And I think the sport is readying itself for diversity. I see my role within it to start the flow of those people, the acquisition of a diverse fan base, and what the fans of tomorrow and the Gen Z are telling us, that unless you are diverse, we're not going to be attracted to you. So one of the things that I also took on board, and I don't know whether I'm directly answering your question or not, was that actually there's an image that sits behind me, which is a documentary that I did earlier this year called The Uncomfortable Race, because I felt that it was myself and Rishi were the two, and we have been for the last 20 years, the sole voices of the ethnic minority family within racing, I suppose. And that's because we have a platform that gives us a slightly louder voice than most, I suppose. But what it was otherwise D&I, as it's come about and come more to the front of mind throughout George Floyd, Black Lives Matter, taking the knee, Colin taking the knee, great man, great documentary if you have not seen it, Copenhagen at the moment, is that you needed more voices, and I needed the voice of tomorrow. So these guys that sat behind me, they're all under the age of 23. And I talked to them about what it was like being from an ethnic minority background in our sport of racing. They've all got different roles. One's in a yard, one wants to be a lawyer within the sport, and the other one actually works for Sky Sports Racing now. And talk to them about how they felt when racing did nothing around the Black Lives Matter or the anniversary of George Floyd, or after the death of George Floyd, when every other sport did. And Rishi and I were very outspoken about it and got shot down because a board room of, I think it was 12 white people, decided that because racing was so poor on a diversity and inclusion front, it shouldn't say anything because it would be embarrassing. Whereas what they should have done is ask us our opinion rather than 12 white people make that judgment without asking what part of the ethnic minority side of racing's family were feeling hurt and not sort of knowing, where we could turn. And then you find out that your sport looked like it didn't care.
In mentioning the likes of Tiger Woods or Lewis Hamilton, I suppose one of the leading figures in terms of setting an example for minority groups within racing in recent years has been Rachel Blackmore, who, with the success that she had over the past 12 months, obviously there have been a number of very successful female jockeys in recent years. Do you feel as if that is really having a tangible effect on the type of people becoming involved? I know that on the back of her success last year, in terms of the media coverage and social media coverage, there is a lot of, a huge number of stories relating to young women and girls being inspired to take an interest in racing and riding. Do you really start to see that effect?
Rachel Blackmore, like Barack Obama, was a result of a lot of work over a decade to get to where Rachel Blackmore was, or to get to where, and Barack Obama, talks about it the whole time of who did what all the way through from Ali, Jesse Jackson, the whole way, everyone did their bit to get him to where he got to at that point in time. And Rachel Blackmore, there are so many pioneers that for Rachel Blackmore to be where she is. She's worked tirelessly. She's absolutely, and she is an amazing jockey and an amazing woman. But there have, in the past, been amazing women with the same amount of ability. So we are all on a journey. The sport's on a journey. In answer to your question, I think I can give you the data. 1/3 of apprentices now riding on the flat are female that are coming through. When I started, well, not even when I started, at the turn of the century, it would probably be 1%. It is now an option, and I think that's tell me in one sentence, Josh, what you're trying to do. What I'm trying to do is to make sure there is a place for you, no matter age, colour, religion, size. You could, whatever it is, there needs to be a place for you to land and be embraced and be able to engage in horse racing. And there are some cracks that have huge gaps in that what I'm trying to fill to make sure there is somewhere for you to engage. If too big to ride and all that kind of stuff, and you can still engage in our sport. And the work over the last 10 years on gender diversity has been fantastic. It's been very hard because it was such a male-dominated sport, both the administrators and the people that were riding and training. Obviously, they still don't have that many female trainers. And, it is gradually getting better because it's becoming an option, and it will continue. And I believe ethnicity will be the next part of diversity to grow. I go in with that. I'm obviously a pusher of that, and I'm hopefully creating change. But it's not just me. You'd have to ask other people whether the work I'm doing is creating change. But I got told by the chief executive of the Racing Post the other day, Josh, when you set out 2 or 3 years ago on this cause, we advertised for a junior journalist, and I told you, you've got no chance, Josh. I had 50 applicants, and they were all white, and only 2 of them were female. He said, we did the same job only a couple of months ago. He said, out of the 50, 7 weren't white, and we had, I think it was 12 females. He said, what you're doing is working. He says, just keep going. And when you work by yourself, you don't get that kind of feedback. So it's, I work alongside people, but it's rare you get the feedback to say that,
That's great. And the numbers on the apprentice jockeys, that's amazing. I never would have guessed it'd be that high. So that's great to hear. As we wrap up, we really didn't touch on your Sky Sports Racing presenting or anything. So I guess my final question will kind of be more related to that. I'll make it a small 2-part because I know we have to go. How was the transition to going on screen and being on screen? Was that nerve-wracking, and did it take a lot of time to get used to? And then I guess secondly, what's your most favorite moment so far in being a presenter, and what's like the most fun thing that you've done that really makes you happy? And you said like meeting your heroes. Has there been one of those moments on screen where you've done something you never thought you'd be able to do, or someone to meet or interview or something like that?
So the first question, and I'm not in a rush, guys, so it's up to you. However long you want this to go on for, I'm very comfortable, because we're talking about some things that I'm passionate about. So I'm in no rush. In terms of nervousness of transferring what I do to being on screen, I wasn't that good to start off with, but it's a bit like when we all do a presentation. If you know what you're talking about, then that presentation, you're only half as nervous. If you're Billy, what you're calling it, and you're guessing, then you're going to be nervous. So I equate it to that. It's like what I'm talking to you guys now. We could be sat in the pub and we're talking about horse racing, and that's all it is. And I know that that's where my skill set in terms of in front of the camera is best when I'm bouncing off other people in terms of my presenting, or I'm a pundit and they're asking me questions and we bounce that way. What the most difficult part, and when I did become nervous, but because I've done it a lot now over the last 3 years, is obviously when it's just you one-on-one with the camera. And that's very, very different. Because I've never played golf by myself, and I've never been to the pub by myself. I bounce off people. I enjoy the energy. When it's by yourself, I'm just like, I'm bored. And then when you start thinking how many hundreds of thousands of people are actually looking at you down there. To start off with it, what that was the daunting side of it. The studio stuff, I could sit there all day and do this kind of stuff. I massively enjoy it. But the one-on-one presenting.
Eddie, you might be great at that then. You spent a few nights at Bugsy's by yourself.
Yet to play golf by myself, though.
You're halfway there.
Yeah, exactly. So in answer, that's the sort of first answer. The second answer of what's the great thing, doing stuff like this. That's what I'm most proud of and most passionate about, is giving people a voice, telling people stories. We've got so much great content and stories that need to be heard. And hopefully someone will turn around and go, that kid looks like me, so that could be an option for me. And that's what I'm ultimately, am I using my position for that? Yeah, but pretty openly. And Sky are huge backers of it as well, which has been brilliant. They've put £30 million towards diversity and inclusion causes over the next 3 years. And anything I've gone to them with, they've never said no. So it's I'm hugely heartfelt thanks to the team there to give me that position to go and do it. But equally, without blowing my own trumpet, I know I've got to be good enough to be given that position to go and do it, or also that the cause I'm pushing is actually one that's society, the sport, and everybody needs,
So I guess I'll ask one more then. On Sky Sports, we've joked a few times with Matt Chapman and his energy. Sometimes he'll take a 3-horse race with a 1-9 favorite, and he'll talk it up pre-race like it's the greatest race. When it goes from 1-8 to 1-9, it's the greatest shift in the odds. Is he always that energetic and always that on, or when the camera turns off, is he the most cool, calm, and collected guy you've ever seen?
He's different off cam. I'm going to say he's different off cam to on cam. He's a fantastic broadcaster. I think sometimes the energy switch loses the off button, which I would say to his face. I'll be working with him again this weekend at Ascot. He's highly knowledgeable and highly intelligent, and I think sometimes that gets lost when he's on one, let's call it. But equally, he's one of the faces of our channel. If not, the top 2 faces will be him and Alex Hammond, who have both done it for years. And if those people have done it for years, he hates to admit it, he's also over 50 and tries to look sort of 21. So he's been doing it for years, and I have to say, whenever I've needed help and reached out to him, he's been there and given it to me without taking the mick or having a laugh when there's a serious subject to be had. And when I brought out this kind of stuff, the first person on text to say, "Well done, keep going," is Matt.
Yeah, I mean, he does seem very outspoken. It seems like when you follow him on Twitter and everything like that, like it's what he's gonna say. He's gonna say, and I think I kind of respect that aspect of him. Although sometimes it's said a little too loudly, a little too long. But it's good that you have people like that, who aren't willing to shy away.
Well, you've got it, because Telly, if we were all monotoned statistician form agents, then that's just bad telly. No one's going to turn on and watch it. You're just going to watch the race and turn off again. You've got to bring about an opinion, and I have no problem at taking advice, opinion, a different opinion. When Matt and I get together, it's great. I can say, he might turn around and go, "I think this," and I'm naturally going to go and tell him and do something different, because that makes good telly. If everyone agrees, it's where's the diversity in opinion? Diversity in opinion is the great thing that gets it going. So it's something that I didn't do. Do I want to be a professional broadcaster? No. Am I a professional broadcaster? Probably semi-professional. It's not something that I moved into with any sort of judgment or strategy. It's something that I think assists in the great causes that I'm trying to achieve for the sport. And so I think also that Matt sees me in a different light to perhaps how he sees others. He respects my knowledge base, but also respects what we're trying to achieve. And that's why, I probably more so than most, when we're on screen, have a really good relationship with him. And if he wants to go toe to toe, he knows I'm well up for it.
Well, Sam, no pressure then, but do you have a final question to wrap things up with?
It's the pressure of the final question. I guess, Josh, it would be good just to hear from you about the rewards for racing, because I know we haven't touched on it that much, but it would be good just to understand what you're trying to do with it, kind of who's it appealing to, and kind of the outcomes and kind of hopes you get from it, really. I'd like to hear kind of straight from the founder's mouth, I guess.
Sure. Well, we're now 11 years old. We've got 1.3 million members. People gain, the simplicity of it is people gain points from online shopping. We've got 4,000 retailers. We've got 4 betting partners. And every time you bet or shop, you get points and you cash them in to go racing. So I'm sure you guys have got, like, be you in the US or UK, top cashback or Quidco and all this kind of stuff. Ours are not dissimilar. We white label off some of those brands, but it's into points. So if you got a hotel room for 10 quid, a hotel room for 100 quid with hotels.com, one of our retailers, they pay 10%, around 10%. You would get £10 in rewards for racing points, and you can cash that in as part pay for a ticket or in full for a £10 ticket. And there are no restrictions. Any ticket across our 31 race courses, even if there's only one left on Gold Cup Day at Cheltenham, you can use your points for that ticket, unlike air miles. So it's one of those ones. We live in a very political sport in terms of horse racing, and this isn't political. The the racecourses love it, the retailers and bookmakers love it, and the racegoers love it. So it's probably why it's lasted so long. It's great. It's responsible. Its members are responsible for 1/5 of all attendances before COVID, the year before COVID. We've never tried to squeeze the business in any way, shape, or form. So we've got value that goes out far more than the revenue that comes in. Yes, it's a profitable business, but it's small profits compared to the numbers that when I say that our members bet over £1 billion with our 4 bookmaker partners in the last 12 months, you can now understand how big this is out there in terms of both its ticketing presence and then also that it's what it does in the bookmaking world. Because what we offer and why we're so regulatory friendly is that what the program offers. And I sort of sit as a sort of I suppose a chairman role. As the founder, I don't work on it day to day. I've got 2 great guys that founded the business with me, Tom and Ian, that run the business day to day. Is that we offer experiential rewards, and I think what the regulators have been really worried about is that cash element of free bet. To be honest with you, it's just become wallpaper offers, and that's why the bookies love it, because the customers turn around going, I had this great. I'm betting with Bet365, Betfair, whoever the bookmaker partner is, and that's helping me go and have this great experience be it at Cheltenham or go and watch the Derby at Epsom or go to my local racecourse. They've made that experience better. So it's helped all round. Again, when I talked to you when we started off tonight, I've always followed passion over paycheck, and if I can share that passion of horse racing, going horse racing with more people, I didn't quite think it'd get to those sort of numbers when we started. It's brilliant, and I'm supremely proud of what it's done, where it is, and as it grows. And exclusive to the Big Chill podcast, we launch across Ireland in the middle of December. I'm actually going out for the sort of press launch at the end of the month at Fairy House with Horse Racing Ireland HRI. So a whole new jurisdiction, whole new set of race courses. People will be able to use it's that pool of points we keep coming round. It's all about a pool, and this is another pool that we've got there.
Well, a nice little scoop for the Big Chill listeners, and it seems like pools seem to be something of the connecting tissue of your life then.
Yeah, I haven't got one out the back here, unfortunately, but that'll be my next aim, I suppose.
That was my next question.
And Josh, thank you so much for coming on. You've been, it's been really interesting to speak with you, and you've been very generous with your time. It'd be great to have you back on again in the future, as I think we could go more in depth on each of the topics that we've spoken about. But thank you so much.
I've enjoyed it, chaps. It's great to meet you.
Great.
Yeah, thanks so much. I mean, you don't have a pool yet, but maybe you said you had your own in horses, so maybe you get a nice Grade 1 winner and you can get the pool.
I haven't got a pool myself, but about 100 yards that direction there's an equine pool. So there you go. That's where I live.
Thanks again.
Cheers, and you.
Yeah. Thanks, Josh.